Let's get into our first topic then. And do you think that the Tories are a sinking ship? Get your calls in for this one now. Kevin here has written a piece in the Mirror where he's used that phrase exactly. They've just suffered losses in 2 by-elections, and recent polling seems to suggest that they could struggle ahead of the next general election under pressure from Labour on one side and Reform on the other. Now, it comes as rebel Tory MPs are said to be lobbying the Prime Minister to stand down as all eyes turn to the local elections in May. So we'd love to know what you think. Will they get your vote, or do you think it's time for a change? Kevin, you seem to be the most logical person to start with on this one. So they're a sinking ship. Why so? Yeah, the UK Conservative government's like the Titanic. It's hit the iceberg, it's going down. The captain's on the bridge still trying to be very cheerful, but everyone's getting in the lifeboats. Tory MPs are quitting in droves. They're not waiting for the general election when we might boot them out. They're going. So far, 58 have said they're going. 72 before 1997 when Tony Blair won that landslide. I think those MPs quitting tells you more than by-elections, because they're looking ahead, they're seeing their own patch, what's going to happen to them, and also at the general election, do they want to go into opposition, which is a hard grind after being power? I think that momentum for change, after 14 years, 4 election victories, the Conservatives have had a long run. I think people think if you haven't fixed the cost of living crisis, if you haven't fixed public services, in fact, you made them worse, you haven't fixed migration, small boats, you're not going to fix it now. Do you think that the Tories are going to suffer a worse result than they did in the 1997 election? I didn't used to. Now I begin to wonder about it, because you've got Labour on the left, you've got the Liberal Democrats in some of the blue wall seats in the south, and then you've got Reform UK, which is the rebadged Brexit party, which was the rebadged UKIP party. And it's taking most of the people who go to Reform UK were Tory voters in 2019. Yeah, I think it's 59% were Tory voters, only 5% Labour voters. So they're getting 8-10%, and they did relatively well in the 2 by-elections recently. That is a big danger for Sunak, who says, look, let's come back to the Conservative family. You vote Reform, you're going to help Labour. Starmer isn't saying you vote Reform, you're going to help the Conservatives. He knows Reform on the hard right is a threat to the Tories too. It's not looking good for the Conservative Party, Mike. Is there anything they can do to pull it back? Well, look, I agreed with Kevin's headline yesterday on his column, Tories sinking feeling as MPs abandon ship. But I think Labour are also in more trouble than people realise. Now, I agree the Tories are a sinking ship, but I do not agree they're going to get massacred at the general election, because... Is there any hope of them winning, though? Well, I'm not sure I'd go as far as to say there's any hope of them winning, but I feel that there could be a case in which they won't lose, if you see what I mean. Now, you know more about politics than me, Kev. What sort of a majority does an incoming Prime Minister need to assert his authority? I would say probably about 40. And I think if he limps in, like David Cameron did, with 10 or 15, I don't think he'll have the backing on the backbenches to be able to be bold and introduce any new policies. And I think that's where he could be. Yeah, but I think the whole point of Keir Starmer is not pitching to be bold and radical. He's going for the centre. He's all into reassurance. Yeah, but I don't accept that as well. I don't accept that as well. Tory sinking ship, sure, but I think they can plug the holes. I think Labour have got real problems when they come in. Now, one thing I never hear, and you're an expert on this, is I never hear anything about Angela Rayner's plans to massively push the party to the left. Mate, if the Tories are out of power, they've lost. You're beginning to sound a bit like Jeremy Corbyn's supporters in 2017, when they claimed because the Tories lost their majority, they had somehow won. Yeah. No, it wasn't. It was a good defeat for Labour in 2017, and it might have been a bad win for the Tories, but it was still a win. What about if the Tories can do some sort of a deal with Reform? What about if the Tories can do some sort of a deal with those who would... Haven't Reform ruled that out? Sorry? Haven't Reform ruled that out? Well, you rule a lot of things out until you're offered a deal, aren't you? And the possibility of maybe doing something. You see, on the Angela Rayner thing, and nobody will answer this for me, nobody from the Labour side, she's bringing radical policies which are going to increase red tape massively, which are going to give more rights to the unions and working people. They're going to abolish all... Are you against rights for working people? I'm not against rights for working people unless they stomify the economy, which is what she will do. Do you think people should be fired and then rehired on worse terms.
No, I
don't.
Do
you think they should do that?
No, I don't.
Do you think they shouldn't have employment rights for 2 years?
In a capitalist economy, you've got to have the freedom of the employer to be able to hire and fire quickly, not be unfair about it, but not be strangled by red tape, which is what Ms Rayner wants to do.
Not. She's talking about rights for
I don't care what
people.
she's talking about. She's a radical and she wants a far-left government, and she will be very influential.
Kevin might have a point, actually, that we might see in the next general election that the Conservative Party might lose, but not by as much as we think, because for some reason Keir Starmer keeps finding himself in hot water for various different reasons. There's been a lot of U-turns by his party. And I just wonder whether Keir Starmer is actually not cutting through, and that could be the lifeboat that the Conservative Party is looking for.
As a general rule, governments lose elections rather than oppositions win them, and the Conservatives at the moment in the UK are doing a pretty good job of losing. But you're right, he's got his own problems. He had the 28 billion green power U-turn. He had the Rochdale shambles, and you know what? There were then 2 by-elections and Labour.
Well, I don't agree. The
Labour, no, it's a fact. You had those issues, and then Labour won the by-elections. That's just a verifiable fact. You may not agree, but it happened.
By-elections came too hot on the heels of both those problems for Labour, and the electorate didn't have time to think about it. Now, the other thing I believe is, Nostradamus here, OK, I still believe there is a massive silent majority in this country of small C voters like me. I'm a small C, but remember, the Red Wall were all small C. There's huge swathes of northern England where they actually agree with the policies of, standing on your own 2 feet, low taxation, bring more controls on migration. And they are the silent majority. They are not speaking up.
They also stand for higher wages and better public services.
Yes, if it can be done by improving the economy.
They also stand for higher wages and better public services.
How is Rachel Reeves going to improve the economy unless she cuts taxes, unless interest rates are cut, and unless we scrap red tape? No policy whatsoever from the Labour side to try and get that done. So anybody voting for Labour knows it can only not get better, it could get worse.
Have you compared growth since 2010 with the 14 years before? Look, it's been an utter failure under the Conservatives. It's been much lower than what went before, including taking into account the financial collapse. I'm sorry.
Kev,
you don't grasp the complexity of the economy when you just say cut taxes and that will get growth.
Well, you're a student of Labour politics, and you know that every time there's been a Labour government since the war, the country's gone bankrupt. Because they basically cannot manage economies.
When has the country gone bankrupt?
Dennis Healey had to rush to the IMF.
When has the country gone back? The country has never gone
rushed
bankrupt.
To the IMF. At the end of Gordon Brown's tenure...
It's never gone bankrupt.
At the end of Gordon Brown's tenure, we had to introduce 3 years of austerity to pay back the bills that had mounted up under Gordon Brown's tenure.
Do you know that debt now is about 3 times higher than it was in 2010 when Labour left office? It's about 2.6 trillion now.
Because of COVID and because of Ukraine.
When it wasn't even 1 trillion
Because we've had to cope with world events.
Excuses.
OK, all your arguments have been very compelling. Do let us know what you think. Do you think that the Conservative government are a sinking ship? Perhaps you think you would give them another chance. 0207 862 2222 is the number for that. Just going back to the by-elections, and I totally accept what you're saying, Kevin. You lose a by-election, you lose. There's no real excuses, except for the turnout being incredibly low. And I just wonder whether actually the Tory government could potentially win back those people that didn't get off their bums and vote.
I agree.
Because they had nobody else to vote for.
That's a straw they're clutching at, and they hope to do that. I think there's little evidence of that now because they've lost so many by-elections for so long that were blue citadels. Some of them with majorities over 20,000. When you begin to lose seats like that, happened to Labour before 1979, you're on your way out.
Is absolutely right.
You can clutch at the low turnout, but I don't think it's going to
absolutely right. Only a few hundred more people in those by-elections voted for Labour this time than they did last time. OK? And it was down to a low turnout, but it was also a total lack of appetite for anything Keir Starmer's got to offer. Well,
let's find out what our viewers think. Dave from Staffordshire, you're up first. What's your thoughts? Do you think that the Conservative Party is a sinking ship, or do they still have a chance?
A very, very slim chance. They really are outsiders. I think Labour have got to do an awful lot wrong, or they've got to do an awful lot right, which they haven't done in 14 years.
Well,
So,
I mean, it's an interesting one because both parties seem to be doing an awful lot wrong, and there's very little positive press for either party. So, in that respect, I mean, all it would take is for the Conservative Party to perhaps just stay still and not make any wrong moves and just let Keir Starmer rack up a few more bad headlines. And do you think the tides could turn?
I don't know, Storm. I wouldn't go with the thought of positive press, because obviously, with the exception of the Daily Mirror and maybe the Telegraph, most of the press is Tory press anyway.
Okay.
Dave, the Telegraph is Tory too, the Tory graph. But I get what you mean. Look, Britain's in recession. NHS waiting lists
Very
have
minor
gone up
recession.
to around a record level. You've got Rishi Sunak, who made 5 promises. 4 of them he won't hit. Do you think if he got anyone on a plane to Rwanda, would that change anything? If in the summer somebody got manacled and dragged onto a plane and was dumped in Kigali?
Absolutely not. No, I don't think it'll make an ape of the difference whatsoever.
What do you think the
There's no
Conservative Party
alternative.
would have to do to try and win it back?
I think they're going to have to accept the fact that you get a reasonable term. They've had a reasonable term, and they're just going to have to sit patient, wait, and take the defeat on the chin and come back. And I don't think that coming back with Parry Badenoch as a leader would do themselves.
You wouldn't be happy with Parry
anyway.
It's interesting, actually. That doesn't sound very optimistic for the Conservative Party at all. The best thing that they could do now is just take the loss on the chin. Dave, thank you very much for your call. Now, Blackpool South MP Scott Benton, who was caught in a lobbying scandal, has had his appeal against, against his recommended 35-day suspension from Parliament dismissed by an independent panel. That will mean another by-election that could cause problems for the Conservatives. It just seems like there is by-election after by-election as far as the
I think they should stop worrying about by-elections, honestly, particularly now as reform have come forward, OK? And by the way, I think the reform bubble will burst. You're old enough to remember the SDP, OK? So here were the Social Democrat Party. Do you remember in the 80s? They were going to be, break the mould of British politics and start something new. The bubble blew out in about 12 months, as new parties always do. Labour and the Tories are so established in the framework of this country's political future, you can't replace them.
The SDP back in '83, with the Liberals had an alliance, they got 26% of the vote at the general election. Labour just got 28%.
And they don't exist anymore. They don't exist.
The system was such that they couldn't win any seats because their vote was spread around the country.
Yeah.
But in Blackpool, I think the the Conservative majority is 3,500. Used to be a Labour seat. That is another Tory loss. That will lower morale.
No, it won't.
He was voted in as a Conservative,
No,
but I think he's an independent.
Scott Benton, because he loses the whip, so he has to sit. But it'll be up to now the people in that part of Blackpool. They will have what's called a recall ballot, and if 10% of them want to dump him, he'll be dumped, and there'll be a by-election.
But they will expect
I'm going to go back to the
that.
calls. Andrew from Gloucestershire, what's your thoughts? Do the Tory party stand a chance?
I think they still do stand a chance. And every conversation I hear, nobody mentions COVID and the cost of this country.
I think Mike mentioned it quite vociferously earlier.
COVID and Ukraine have cost us plenty.
OK, and so you blame that for the bad economics, nothing to do with Liz Truss's mini-budget?
Yes, it could be a slight indication, but the interest rates would have gone up anyway, even if that hadn't happened.
I agree.
OK, and so what do you think that Rishi has to do now to win back these votes?
I think he needs to stick to his guns, keep what he's doing, and hopefully the intelligent population of this country will see through it.
Andrew, can I just ask you this? Is there anything about Labour or Keir Starmer which would attract you at all to wanting to vote for them?
I won't vote for them.
Why?
Because to me, the Labour Party is and always be the same. I can't see them changing.
Right, so was it the same in Tony Blair and Jeremy Corbyn? Was it exactly the same, Andrew?
I think behind the scenes it was. They just had a very good front man.
OK, I'm going to have to wrap it up here. We have run out of time. But Andrew, thank you very much for your call. Thanks for all your calls after the break. Is it time to...